Hello, patrons. This is our behind the scenes for today's episode, the second in the Seven Deadly Sins series. We were talking today about greed. So we did pride, we did greed, and I have a question for you, actually, Rex. I'm wondering about whether or not it feels like we're sort of duplicating some of this stuff from our motivation series. And so
I guess.
like it feels a little repetitive, and I'm worried about that. Like I'm worried that our listeners are going to feel that way about it.
Well, some of it is, but then motivation. We just did one thing, right?
Yeah.
This is focused motivation.
Yeah, so we were talking in motivation about the actions that follow from a character who is a greedy character. What will they do? Today we were talking about what would they sacrifice? What are some of the results of their greed? So maybe there is a little bit of a difference.
Yeah. I mean, there's going to be an overlap, but
Yeah.
eventually you're going to overlap with everything else. But it's focused. Focused specifically on greed is the core wound.
And the Seven Deadly Sins piece of it, too. I think if we keep bringing it back to that piece, to that initial, why are these things bad, and that faith-based, I know this is not a faith show, right?
Right.
But if we keep, there's a lot about literature that is inherently from faith traditions, right? When we think about having threes, for example, right? Whenever there's three examples of something, or we use threes in books, even our plot structure typically has a threes, right, where you've got the first incident, the second, and then the climax. All of that comes out of the Holy Trinity. So there's a lot of how faith
Yeah, but the seven deadly sins didn't come about because of the interpretation of the scriptures. It came about by an observation of human nature and what actions or what motivations tend to lead people, to do horrible things. So you consider it a psychological evaluation at the time before there was psychology.
And as they're talking about it, they're informing what will become storytellers, authors, and literary folks, right?
Well,
so the Seven Deadly Sins creates kind of an education basis, like a foundation for those characters. So then you're Shakespeare, you're familiar with the Seven Deadly Sins, you're going to write Othello, and you're going to create Iago, who is a greedy character after power.
Right. I mean, and it works. I mean, you look at the Seven Deadly Sins, you're not going to say any of those are good, except for Gordon Gekko. About greed.
But so put it to me this way, though, because as we were getting to the end of the show today, and I was kind of losing a little bit of momentum because I started thinking about, do I give this much thought to my characters in my book? I don't. I mean, I'm writing the characters, they're doing what they're doing. There are times that during revision, I'll go back and I'll make some tweaks. I'll push people in certain directions, push characters in certain directions, but I'm not really that black and white about these characters. A lot of times they're much more nuanced than this singularly focused on greed, right?
I guess. I mean, don't forget, we talked mostly about extreme examples in our case, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's lesser forms of it as well.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about the most obvious versions of it, Shylock and
where it's the defining characteristic for them, as
Where
opposed to just part of who they are.
Or Ebenezer Scrooge, where it's its only characteristic.
But maybe it's just part of who they are in some way, right? So, for example, in Before Pittsburgh, Brian talks about how his friend Chris is a real estate agent. He's gotten himself into a townhouse in a new neighborhood, and he's going to make some money off of this, right? He's one of the first investors in this new neighborhood. He's living in this townhouse with two roommates, and he and his girlfriend are starting to get serious. The girlfriend wants to move in, and he says no because she can't afford to pay the rent. And he's making enough money off his buddies living there that he's like, this financially, that doesn't make any sense. So there is a little element of greed in Chris's behavior. It doesn't make Chris a greedy person necessarily, as much as it says here's this thing he did. And Brian even says I hope he's not sacrificing his relationship, because women want to believe they're the most important thing in your life, and if you choose wealth instead, they're not going to believe that they're the most important thing in your life, right?
Right.
And so even just that acknowledgement that Chris has made this greedy choice can be enough to give Chris another dimension, right?
Yeah, because characters, especially you don't want your main characters to be, or your other characters to be nuanced.
Yeah.
Right?
You don't necessarily want somebody who's only greedy, period. They've got to also have all these other sorts of...
Maybe. I don't know. Depends on how much depth you really want to give a character.
Yeah, it's hard to say.
It is difficult.
And then how do we tease out... Because then again, that conversation is not one that I intentionally thought, I want Chris to be a greedy character. Here's what's going to happen. It's as I'm writing this book, this is a conversation, right? Like that's just what shows up. So then afterwards you go, should I leave it in there? Should I take it out? What does it say about Chris? What does it say about Brian? Like none of that I don't think is really informed by this 7 deadly sins analysis as much as it is you can look at any book and you can use the 7 deadly sins to analyze these characters. Which of these characters is guilty of which of these sins?
Right.
Whew. Okay. Now I've worked it out, right? Now I've talked it out, worked it out, I'm feeling better about it. Thanks everybody for being patrons of the show. We appreciate you and we appreciate your support. We will see you next week.